You're listening to the Mission Makers Show, a podcast that inspires humans to get into the mindset of success. My name's Farah Nanji, and I'm the founder of a business in the motorsports industry that explores leadership lessons from things like Formula One. I'm also a DJ and music producer in the underground electronic scene, and a public speaker on key topics like resilience, building high-performance teams, overcoming learning difficulties, and stimulating creativity. And to tie it all together, I love writing thought-provoking content as a journalist for these industries which are so unique in themselves. On this show, I'm sitting down with some of the most inspiring and driven people I've met around the world to talk about their processes, their failures, the lessons they've learned, and how they are truly making an impact for this world. So guys, today is the final episode of Mission Makers Season 1. So my guest today had to be someone really special, and so I decided to invite my sister onto the show, not only because it's Christmas and it's all about family, but because the mission she's devoted herself to so selflessly is around unlocking children's potential through the Montessori method. And this magical method is centered heavily around consciousness and observing what children naturally gravitate towards, and then guiding them to achieve, as my sister says, the inner secret mission that nature has given us. The early years are so pivotal in our development of who we become that 90% of who we are today is formed by the age of 5. And these form our values, they form our respect, our empathy, and our foundation. And this is so important in who we become. And so in this episode, we talk a lot about such a deep and personal subject of unlocking our childhood and how best to nurture the future generations. Hey Sabeen, how are you doing today?
I'm really good. How are you?
Melting in this lockdown. It's so hot. But thanks so much for doing the show. We're really excited to have you on with our season finale.
I'm so happy to be here. It's such an honour that you want to speak to me and that I can be a part of this. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you so much. Now, I think there's loads of people that will be so excited to hear from you, not only as my sister, but as somebody who is really inspiring in achieving her own mission in life, which is centered all around children and growth mindset. So I think there's a lot that our listeners are going to learn from you today. So let's dive straight in.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us, how did it all begin, your passion for working with the early years?
So it's actually really interesting because this wasn't something that I planned in my life. I was finishing up my degree at university. I studied psychology with philosophy, and near the end of my degree, I had a really strong interest in child psychology, and I wanted to make a difference to children and learn more about it. So I thought I would probably go on to do a master's and a PhD and become an educational psychologist. But at the same time, our parents, particularly our mum, was telling me, well, why don't you give the Montessori course a go? Because that is an amazing way that you can make such a difference to children's lives.
Yeah.
And because I was really young, I was 21 at the time, I wasn't exactly sure which path I'd be going down. So Mum suggested I do this course because it was at that time it was over 3 summers rather than a whole year. So I could, if I didn't like it, then I was free to make a different decision in my life. So I went and I started that 2 weeks after my finals at uni, and I sat in that room and something just came over me which I've never felt so strongly in my life. This deep sense of purpose and just this deep respect and appreciation for this woman who's created such a revolution in education. And since that moment, this love and desire to work with children and to be in the Montessori has just become stronger and stronger over time. And it's at times it's almost all-consuming how much I love doing our work and being a part of it. So that's sort of where it began. But at the same time, the story actually goes much further back because when I was doing my course, it made me start reflecting back on my childhood experiences. And I was particularly lucky because when Mum did her diploma, she did it in the institute in Hampstead. And they at the time had the children's house downstairs. So I was lucky enough to go to Montessori as a young child. And I remember when I was doing my course, I started just feeling so overwhelmed that I had this experience in my life and how much it had shaped the rest of my path, because I was lucky enough that when I left, all of my experiences in education went really, really well, and I really loved learning, and I loved being in school. I loved everything about being around other people, and I know how much that experience just set me up for success. So that's sort of where it began for me.
And you've already alluded to it just there with Mum, but do you think that it chose you or you chose it? Because we do run a family business in Montessori today. So
I think I definitely would have found Montessori at some point in my life, but it definitely wouldn't have happened at 21 years old. I think it would have happened much later on, because it's a sort of mission that is so deep, and it's so big that you have to be really ready to go into it and to do it authentically. So I think I would have found my way there eventually, but maybe 10, 20 years later. I think, and particularly my peers, when I did my course, they were much older, and you could see that they made such a conscious decision, made many sacrifices to be able to do this work. So yeah, I think it's a bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah, they're interesting. And so for all of those listening today who may not be aware of Mary Montessori, who is an incredibly inspiring woman, could you tell us a little bit about who she was and what her mission was in life?
So I think to summarise Montessori, it's honestly one of the hardest things, because it's something you have to see in action, and you have to see it in a place which really is authentic. And so to capture it, I think the essence is that every human being, kind of similar to this podcast, has a mission, an inner secret mission that nature has given to it. And that mission within that human being, that potential, is unlike any other animal, because we could be born in any country in the world and absorb the qualities of that culture, that time and that space. And we have the potential to become anything that we wish to be. And for that potential to be released and to unfold in the way in which nature intended, you need to have a supportive environment around you for that to flourish. So to summarise Montessori is to really enable the human being to unfold as nature intended, and to be in an environment which gently guides that potential out of that human being. So really deeply understanding who is this unique human being, why are they here, what is their mission? And you can see that at age 3, these qualities, the personality traits, come through so strongly within that person. And when you're following that life in a way that's in accordance to the inner drives, that human being feels so deeply supported, so motivated, so eager to learn. It's incredible the things that they can achieve at that young age. And a bit about Montessori herself. So she was an Italian educator born in Rome almost 150 years ago. And she was a pioneering woman at her time, because she completely wanted to challenge the status quo of the educational system. She was one of the first Italian doctors, which was not an easy task for her to get onto that program. And after some time, she started working with young children, and she was given an opportunity to set up the school for young children, because the workers in this complex, in this development, the children were sort of running wild. And somebody approached her to ask her to just make a place for children. She'd been quite widely known about her work, particularly working with special needs children. And from there, she opened what we call the Children's House, the Casa dei Bambini. And she didn't know what she was going to expect, but because she had this really strong scientific background, she was so deeply driven to, number one, give a different space for children to what was expected. At that time, children were just thought as something to just be looked down upon, and so she wanted to really, really understand, what do these children need, and so she created this environment which incredible things started happening, and slowly the whole world knew about her and her mission and what she was creating. And this was back in a time without any technology. Just the essence and the authenticity of her mission alone started spreading around the world like wildfire, and it's incredible to see how it travelled and how she, through all the challenges she had in her life, managed to spread this message that children have so much potential. These early years are pivotal in their development, and we can do so much in this time if we support that human being.
And she even went against the Pope, didn't she?
Yes, absolutely. So when she wanted to study medicine, it wasn't allowed for women at the time. So she fought with the Pope because she really felt that wasn't fair. And hats off to her as a woman for really standing up to so much authority and societal pressures.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you mentioned how pivotal the early years in defining who we are and also figuring out our life's purpose. So can you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Like, I think we know that 90% of the brain forms when you're 5, and is it 80% by the age of 3, or?
So it's something that us in the early years, we almost want to scream at the top of our lungs how important it is. Not just because we see it, we feel it, we believe it, but now all the scientific knowledge is out there. And this is something that's really interesting because Montessori already could see it. Her theories of child development went so hand in hand with what later then emerged when we had access to MRIs, when our understanding of the brain developed over time. And what we know now is that 80% of our brain develops in the first 2 years of life. So that child is an unconscious being who's absorbing and creating themselves in that time from the experiences around them. And 90% develops by 5. The last 10% of your brain development happens within the next 20 years of your life. So by about the age of 25, then your brain is fully formed as a human being. And it's just so powerful to think 90% of what's happening inside my brain that's been created is happening in those early years. She calls it like a bulb. The root of the personality, the root of the human being happens in those early years. And not just in terms of the brain development, but in terms of personality development, in terms of our ethos, our values, our respect, our mannerisms. Are we the type of people who hold the door open for others? Do we have that consideration, that higher empathy, that social consideration, that love for others, that love for nature? All of those messages and that mindset gets started and jump-started in the early years. So it's absolutely so crucial to us.
And if a foundation, goes wrong because the environment around them is toxic or they're not supported properly as a child, how difficult is it to undo that damage done in the early years?
Well, childhood trauma is something that is just it's such a deep topic, and there's so much to explore there. I think the first thing to say is that us as human beings, we are incredibly resilient. And it's a testament as well to people's strength who've gone through so much adversity in childhood, had people in their lives who really didn't support them. And I've seen it firsthand, sadly. There have been children with us at times who you can see and have had horrible life circumstances. But I think we are the types of creatures that we just need one person perhaps in our life who shows us a different way of being and loves us. And if we're lucky enough to just have one person in our life, it doesn't have to be our parent. It could be an uncle or a teacher or somebody in our life who shows us a different way, who hears us, who sees us. That can be incredibly grounding and rooting for us in our lives. At the same time, when you've gone through childhood trauma, it's incredibly so deep within you, and at times perhaps you're not even aware about the extent in which sometimes even the brain works in such a way that you won't even have memories for many years in your life. So there's a lot to explore there. I think just we have to harness the resilient nature of the human being to be able to cope with adversity, but also make sure that there are people around who can really support that person in some way. And we can all make a difference, can't we? To people who we don't know so well, or in times we form a relationship with people who may need somebody in their life. So it's a huge thing.
And part of it is really, as you said, about being open and honest and vulnerable enough to accept and know that something did happen, and that might be the first step towards a recovery.
Yeah.
Yes, do you want to say something? So how do you personally define success?
Well, for me, it's interesting because, I grew up in a very society-based definition of success about, doing really well in school, probably going down a more corporate path in life. And I always had sort of that vision in myself about somebody who would, achieve well and do well. I think for now, where I am in my understanding is that being authentic within myself is a huge part of the puzzle. And I think the other part of success is when you feel like you made a difference to this world. You know, I think with this whole COVID thing, it has brought up things about, okay, God forbid something happens to my life right now. I think if I look back and some, you know, it's the end for me, I will feel happy and I feel successful in my life because I've made a difference to a small community in whatever way I have. And that for me feels like success, that my life on this earth has been successful. But maybe my definition may change over time. I think it is very, you know, fluid at times. It depends where we are in our life, what we can do. But I think really being authentic within that human being about who we are and what we want to do in this life is super important.
Wow, that's so powerful. And you mentioned about, you know, outcome-driven sort of society, and we do live in a very outcome-based society from the very early years, where, you know, you hear stories of parents who even before the child is born, they're already, you know, trying to get places for them in school for them to succeed. So living in such an outcome-based society, how do you raise children who are very self-motivated?
It's a great question. So I think the first thing to remember is that I think ultimately all parents want their children to succeed. And all of us have been, you know, part of this culture about really being not afraid at times, but definitely driven to want to enable children to have all the opportunities in their life. But I think we need to start sort of from scratch. So as parents and as educators, we have to, number one, remember that parents are the most primary educators of a human being in their life. They're the most influential people in a child's life. They will be with them, hopefully, throughout their whole journey in life. And so recognizing that comes with a double-edged sort of responsibility, because we have to then look back at our childhood and we need to start thinking, what were the messages given to us as children? And maybe they weren't the right messages as well. Maybe they were ones which could have been different about what success really means as a human being, acknowledging, you know, effort and how hard people work rather than just being focused on the outcome. So I think, and that can be quite painful as well when you look back and you think, actually, yeah, you know what, there were times in my life where I didn't feel heard, I didn't feel valued. So starting from that place of self understanding, and as a team with your partner, really talking and discussing this special miracle that's come into our life. What do we really want for that life force? You know, are we really watching it and letting it unfold? Because that's a separate entity from us, and they have their own inner mission and their own drive. So to really be in that moment with that human life. Of course, you know, do everything in our power to give them a high quality education. That is absolutely so powerful. The right place, the right time can do wonders for all of us. But I think really be present with that life force to understand them. I think that will really be something that can sustain and always, you know, guide and motivate.
Very interesting. And so as an early years educator, you are helping to develop the next generation and the future of mankind as you know it. So what responsibility do you feel that you have as an educator?
Oh, it's huge. You know, as you know, as my sister, this job, it's not a job for me. This is my whole life. And it's something that keeps me up at night because I care so much about the lives that enter my building. And there's, you know, they come to me and I see them as babies because they're about 2.5, 3 years old when they come to me, but we have an infant community where most of them start around 1.5, 2 years old. And I see them as tiny little babies who come and I think there's just that maternal instinct within me is just, I feel such tremendous respect and gratitude of holding that space for them. So every day for me, it's almost like I have to, before I even start my day, I have to meditate. I have to be in the right headspace to give wholeheartedly the right emotional environment for these children who enter my space, because that affects everything. Just one comment, one thing that you could say could shatter somebody's self-esteem. And I'm so conscious about raising children who feel so strong in themselves, so loved, so supported, that it takes a huge amount of energy, internal energy, to really ensure that I'm giving them the right messages, my team's giving them the right messages each day. So it is, it's a huge responsibility, but it's something I feel so grateful at a young age that I can do in my life.
And particularly now with lockdown, I mean, this has had a terrible effect on children, and being starved, from social interaction, and seeing people wearing masks, and crucially not having access to education. I mean, this is massive. So what are your sort of thoughts on kind of getting through this crisis for children and parents who are kind of at home with their child, and also the fact that already we were such a digital society, and now every single company practically on the planet has been forced to digitally transform. And so what sort of level do you feel is appropriate for children as well within that, when parents are looking at alternative methods to educate their child or keep them entertained?
Well, I think if we start from an actual understanding of the human being and what the needs are as a young child, that will help guide our approach during this exceptional circumstance. Number one, we are social primates. We need each other. We're the only species in the world that rely on another for our survival. When we're born, we're not like any other animal who can survive. If something happens to their parent, we won't survive without a human being. We need love from our parent. We need a secure attachment from our primary caregiver. So we are socially primed. We grew up in hunter-gatherer tribes. We were always around people and a big eclectic mix of different personalities. And over time anyway, with modern technology, with modern lives, with living in cities, that's already been quite removed from us. And with this pandemic, it's now in its extreme. So first of all, understanding that we need social relationships in our life. It's such a huge part of our life, and particularly in childhood. I think most of my memories I have of my childhood are being with my friends or being with, you. It's such a socially driven time for children. So we have to understand, and coming to the technology part, children need movement. They need 3 hours a day in the early years to really have their brain developed optimally. And as we were when we were children, we were always outside. We barely sat down. And we lived in a time where we didn't have much technology, particularly in those early years. The most we did was watch maybe 20 minutes of some TV, not even every day. Most of our day was active. We've now transformed in the digital revolution to be living a lot more of an insular life. So as it was difficult enough, and I actually did a big project with an occupational therapist where we looked at movement, because a researcher called Dr. Madeline Portwood discovered that most 3-year-olds' physical development was already really, really behind of where we wanted to be. And that's already by 3, so that's going to affect so much of their later development, their literacy development, how they hold a pencil, their mathematical development. Every element of our being is impacted by the way in which we've evolved as a society. So I think using technology has to, particularly in the early years when children really have a job to do, they need movement for their development. We have to be so mindful about what we create, and obviously life isn't going to be perfect. We don't all have big gardens, we don't have access to outdoors as much as we need it. We have to be creative in our approach about how we're getting through this pandemic, and what experiences we can give to them. And I think the more we can give to them actively rather than passively, the better, because what they learn from an iPad is absolutely not the same from what they get from physically being active. So that's my advice, is that constantly remember, what are the needs of my child? What does this human life need in childhood? And it really, really needs active learning. So that's my strong belief system and message.
And probably, when they get towards an age where it might be okay to have some digital kind of tools, then setting boundaries within that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think once they're around about 6, it's a different mind. Montessori says that we go through 4 stages as a human being. So the first stage of infancy from birth to 6 is the most crucial part of our personality formation. Then from 6 to 12, in childhood, it's a relatively calm and stable period of our life, but it has different needs to the needs we have as a child. By that age, most of us can read, we can write. So already our intentional relationship with technology has changed. As a young baby, as a young infant, we have no idea. We're just pressing things for stimulation for, addictive almost reasons. As a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old who can read, who does understand what things are saying on the screen, they can use it for educational purposes, for research, for understanding the world around them in a greater depth. That's fantastic. It's a fantastic resource, in our life. But again, it needs strong boundaries set about what's appropriate. It needs really, really strict parental supervision on terms of what they're accessing, because it's absolutely beyond shocking how easy it is for a perpetrator to come in on these games and, do all sorts of things without anybody even realizing. Just one message can be the opening of a can of worms of something from happening for a child. And we just, childhood trauma as it is so toxic and damaging. And having that realm open digitally is terrifying. We go through a huge amount of safeguarding training and courses, and it's unbelievable how much it's in our technology, whether it's from a YouTube video, which when you're flicking, something can just pop up without you even knowing and sending a message to that young child's brain. So, everything needs to be like super monitored. Even as they get older, I think it's so important to have very, very strict parameters about it. So it's really serving that human being in their life.
And also there's the other part of it about it being addictive and knowing that it's an addiction. So why give something to someone from such an early age that you know is only going to become an addictive habit?
Children don't have self-regulation. At 3 years old, you're not going to be able to stop yourself from, binging on technology. It's so addictive in its nature. So why introduce it into that young child's mind who doesn't have that capacity yet to understand the parameters and the gravity of what it is? So gently and slowly in time, absolutely introduce it. We all need it to survive in this modern world. There's no 2 ways about it, but it has to happen at the right time for that human being, for it to really be used in an optimum way for them.
Absolutely. And so going back a little bit towards Montessori and it being more about the experience of learning as opposed to the tangible sort of outcomes of learning, is there something intrinsic about the Montessori method that hasn't enabled it for it to be rolled out on a much mass scale? Because of course it is a global presence. There are Montessoris on all corners of the globe, but they are all private institutes. So why is it that the state hasn't adopted this method of learning?
Yeah, and I think if Montessori was alive right now, I think she would feel probably quite sad how little progress our educational system has made since her time, because when she was alive, she felt how backwards our system, because education is the only industry which hasn't revolutionized in the ways in which all other industries in the world has revolutionized in the last 100 years, 200 years, really since the Industrial Revolution. We are still living in a top-down model of education, sadly, where we sort of view that one teacher has most of the knowledge and will impart that to the class of children in the same way. But what we know is we all are different. We all have a special inner way that we absorb, that our needs are particular to ourselves at that moment, and those need to be unlocked. And that's the essence of Montessori, is flipping the model on its head, of it being, a bottom-up approach to learning. So for it to be rolled out nationally and globally and in all schools, we need to invest so much more in our systems. Our systems are breaking at the seams in the education world. It's so underfunded. It's so, particularly in the UK, which you really would think would be a pioneer and a leading country in the world about how our educational system is. It's really not. Particularly in the state schools, they are seriously struggling to cope, really, because the challenges and the resources just aren't enough. So as it is, it's a really challenging system to run.
Yeah.
Then if you try and make it change from a top-down approach to a bottom-up, it would require so much more investment and a lot more understanding of child development. I really don't think we are on par with what we know. We know how important the early years are, but we're not there yet in making sure that children have high-quality early years education and experiences. Even though the research is all there saying this makes or breaks a human being, we haven't listened, I think, really yet to the message that's there. And I think that's more at the political leaders and the people at the tops of power. They're not investing enough in education to try and get it on par to what we want it to be.
And I hope that's not a conscious choice, from our leaders, but we don't know, right? Because the reforms and the support system for the educational industry is shocking, as you say, and it's breaking at the seams, which is really sad. And so also what I wanted to ask you is that there is a tremendous variation in the way that the method is adopted globally. It seems like maybe, I don't know if there's enough regulation when somebody, or when a provider or a setting says that they're a Montessori. Do you find this problematic? Or do you feel like as more people adopt this method, the better it is?
Yeah, no, I actually do feel it's really sad, the discrepancies in quality, because, quality early years education and experience is everything. And if you're going to be a Montessori, you need to do it authentically, because she herself worked so beyond hard. She dedicated every single element of her life to this. Even her last memories, there was an interview by her son, Mario Montessori, with her, and he was saying that in her last moment of her life, she'd been asked to set up a school in Africa. And she was quite old by this point, and he was saying to her, "Oh, but aren't you a little bit old now to try and set up another school?" And she's like, no, I want to go, I'm going to do it. Even in the last moments of her life, she had this drive, there's more to do, there's more work to go. And whenever she did something, she did it in its authenticity, in its entirety, and gave everything within her to create that quality experience. Because Montessori isn't a trademark, any Tom, Dick and Harry can open it. We do have quality accreditation programs. So for example, in the UK, we have something called Montessori Education UK, which is an organisation, it's a charity which accredits Montessoris which are of a quality, and you need to go through an inspection for that. But most parents don't know that exists.
And that's not a global, that's just in the UK.
That's just in the UK. And there are other programs in the world which have the same, accreditation. So as a parent, you wouldn't first of all know that you've maybe heard about Montessori, and that's an amazing way and experience for young children, but perhaps you don't know that there's such discrepancies. And I've walked into places before in the UK where they just have a few materials and they think that's a Montessori, and I'm really sorry to say, but it's not, because the Montessori philosophy is not just the materials, it's the understanding. It's understanding that every single thing in this room has been scientifically designed. It needs somebody trained. It's like walking into a science lab and not using the equipment with any training. You wouldn't be able to use it to its full advantage. And it's the exact same message and understanding within the materials. And it's the vibe, it's the understanding, it's understanding how to unlock each child's potential. It's a huge amount of training. So yeah, I think if you're going to do it, you've got to do it authentically. Because just as a testament to her and what she created, then it has to be a reflection of that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite sad because it's always a question about, as well, relevant to this show, that, you're on a mission and you spend your life devoting something to a brand or a legacy that you're creating, and then actually having another person and leaving that legacy in the hands of others it's so difficult, isn't it?
It is. I think what's amazing though with Montessori is that how much truth and power was in the philosophy, that it's still sustaining itself to this day, and I think it's going to hopefully be unshakable in the world, because so many parents have experienced the beauty and the magic of it. I have parents in tears at times because I meet with the parents one-on-one 3 times a year for at least an hour with each family, each session. And we go so deep as a partnership in understanding that human life force within us. It's such a moving experience, I think, for families to have a space which will really understand that child, that life, with such a deep understanding and respect to it, that's probably why it's been sustained as well, because we felt it even on a small scale. I felt how much power is in this method, this philosophy. So I think, hopefully it will just sustain itself over time.
Yeah, definitely. And so what would be your advice for new parents who haven't had children yet? What advice could you give them?
Well, having children in itself is just such a miracle in itself. The fact that as human beings we can create another life force, it's such a huge deal, And I think we need to start thinking when we're preparing our environments, when we're preparing ourselves as well mentally for this experience, to understand first of all, what was our childhood like? Because that comes with a lot. I know for me, and I feel like my childhood was a beautiful childhood in many ways. There were challenges, of course, but it was, I was extremely lucky to have amazing people around me in my childhood. And not everybody has that experience at all. So first of all, starting from that place, what was my childhood like? What were the messages that my parents gave to me? What were the messages around me in society? And trying to understand, are these the messages that we want to give to my child? Because the messages that we give to children form their inner voice, that voice inside of us, that inner critic, or that voice inside us that's looking for blame, or comparing ourselves. That's starting from the messages we're given as a child and the attachment that we have with our primary caregiver. Are we ready to always meet the needs of that child? And also enable them to have independence and autonomy to grow as their own human being, as their own life force in a safe way. So we have to first understand the gravity of the mission. And when we start understanding that and we start thinking, okay, this is what I want for my child, this is how I would like to be with them, then you need to then do further understanding about how do I actually do that? What are the needs that I need to meet? Whether it's as a baby, what needs do I need to meet? What's the right way in which I can prepare myself for this experience? So you need to start doing research and understanding about what the actual needs are for a human being, and then you have to start thinking, well, how can I create an environment in which that life has everything it needs to thrive and survive? And there is a lot now available for parents to look in on Montessori at home. This isn't just something that children access in a classroom, and it's definitely not something children just experience in the early years. Montessori is a way of life, it's a way of being. So definitely parents can access now so much more information and understanding before they even have a child, to really understand what we can do as human beings in our power to do our best for that life, being in the right place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really important, and whether or not a parent chooses to put their child in Montessori or not, the most important thing is what they're looking for in that setting when they're making that decision, because obviously that child is going to spend hours of their day in this environment. So what are some of the things that parents should be looking out for in an early years setting?
Well, often when I have parents who don't know much about Montessori and no prospective parents, first thing I say to them is, the feeling you get when you enter a space tells you everything. You have to trust your intuition, because ultimately it's in the hands of the people who run an institution that make it what it is. Is it a space where children are really loved? Do you feel that warmth when you enter? this is a space where my child is going to feel the same amount of love as they do at home? Is it a space in which children have freedom to be themselves? Is it a space in which the people who are involved are highly educated and have dedicated, a huge amount of energy to create a beautiful space for them? Is it a space which is ordered, has clear messages given to children? Is it a calm space? Is it a space I would like to be? Am I curious about this space? And I think the intuition within us is so powerful. So, I don't have a sales pitch ever with any family that walk in the door. I'm very honest that you have to feel the trust. You have to really fully trust the space, because otherwise it's not going to work. And I think our intuition is so powerful. So I think that energy that you get when you walk into an environment and you feel it's optimum for a human being, for a human life, this miracle that's come through, is everything. So that's what I would say is my advice.
I mean, I think that applies to anything, any situation, any room that you walk into. Feeling the energy and having that intrinsic intuition that just hits you like a lightning bolt in like 1 second. You can't ignore that. It is speaking to you and it is trying to kind of send a message to you or a signal. And how important is nutrition, in children? And we know, of course, it's absolutely everything in adults and stuff. But how important is it when we're fueling this brain that's developing at its 90% capacity at such a young age?
Oh, this is huge. For me, my philosophy is that quality nutrition is everything. As it is in our environment, it's laden with pesticides, antibiotics in our milk. We already are living in a very toxic environment. And now with COVID, there's such high cleaning products being used in our environment. I think it's even more of a reason for us to be conscious about where we're getting our food source from, how these animals or vegetables, fruits, grains, how they're being treated. We have to, as much as humanly possible, because it's always not going to be practical, go for high quality products for our children, with the least amount of pesticides inside it. So we still don't know the full damage, the full extent to what's being given to us, how it affects our whole being. So I would highly just recommend a very, very rich diet full of whole grains, full of fruits, full of vegetables, and introduce those tastes as from the moment of weaning, and just continue and expand that palate from the earliest moments. Because there's nothing more challenging than a fussy eater. It's so tough. Once those habits set in childhood, it's so difficult to break. When children get a taste for highly processed food, it's going to be a tug of war to bring them back to a very nourishing diet. So when they start weaning, it's the most important time for a family to really evaluate what they're eating and how that's going to be transmitted and taken on by their child as well. So and also prenatal as well. I think there's a huge power in as an expecting mother, to really nourish every cell of your body with goodness. I think it's so important for our own mental well-being as well.
It's something we talk about a lot at home, because we know what our mum went through when she was on her journey of pregnancy, and obviously for her it was a very conscious choice, and we always joke that she ate so much spinach during when I was being formed, that it's just made me so strong. Even today I feel the impact. And she even went to a specialist at that point who evaluated all of her, like I think her hair and like all of these things, and they kind of said all of these are the things that are going to really work for you, and it really worked. It's a miracle how much.
It's like growing a plant. If you put it in toxic soil, it's not gonna flourish, is it? And the womb is that space for that human life, for that embryo to develop optimally. So and then you've got to just keep going forward with that as much as you can. Of course, we're not perfect, but definitely the best we can. We should give, and remove, sugar and addictive substances as much as possible.
Yeah, again, it's like, why allow that addiction to form from such a young age, because it's going to be that tug of war. And when none of us are perfect, I mean, we know secretly, between our telepathic minds that, I had a huge sugar addiction growing up as a child, and I'm still, fighting that tug of war with my internal voice in my head, resisting that temptation. All of those things are so difficult. I mean, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was one of my favourite films growing up, and just the way that sweets and sugar can be so magical, and the way that it's, advertised and presented, it's really tough. And I just feel like if you're when you're younger and the people around you stop you from having that enabling habit, and it's so tough because all it takes is £1 from going to the sweet shop and having, the freedom. Obviously you're not going to be so controlled.
And it's everywhere, isn't it?
It is
you can't
everywhere.
avoid it.
You can't.
And I think, we have to obviously have pleasure in our food, but
of course,
ultimately in childhood, we're forming all the habits that as a human being we're going to have in our life. So why start an unhealthy chain reaction? I think that's the message, as much as humanly possible. Enable success for that human being.
And you've taught us so much, because you're so passionate, about nutrition, and it's so amazing to see even in the school what the efforts and the lengths you go to towards, having like more of an Ayurvedic approach or more holistic approach towards nutrition, and also like their children would just never know when something's sweet, it's actually got from like the right source, like the pancakes you make, for example, sweet potato pancakes. Nobody would ever know, that it's made from that source. So that's really interesting. And also, Sabeen, I'd love to ask you, who is a teacher that you've never forgotten, that stayed with you for the rest of your life?
Such a great question, because I really feel that when you have that experience in your life of having a teacher who you've never forgotten, and it's often about how they made you feel, it's life-changing. And often when I reflect back on the people in my life, the way they made me feel was heard, valued, they supported who I was, they believed in me. And I was really, really fortunate that one of my, I think, biggest educators in my life, aside from our family, aside from our parents, was a woman called Calin, who, when I was a child, she was running the children's house in the Montessori in Hampstead, and Mum was training upstairs, getting her diploma. And Calin was an amazing person, because not just her knowledge of child development, but the way in which she interacted with children. I've had the fortune now to learn from her as an adult, because she runs a course called the Observation Course, and she's gone on to create, with 2 other people, the first Montessori adolescent community. So they have a program which goes all the way from bump to the age of 18. It's awe-inspiring to see a Montessori environment later on. But when I reflect back, why was that experience and knowing her so powerful in my life? It's the way in which she was with me. And I still feel like overwhelming appreciation to have somebody in my life who gave me a space where I felt loved, where I felt seen, where I felt heard and valued. I think it's just so powerful.
Well, it's an incredible, it's an absolute rarity to be taught by somebody at such a young age, and then to learn from them and still have that connection with them and access to them much later on in life. And I think even yesterday we were talking about, some of the stuff about the outcome-based society and how we sort of allow how we kind of encourage self-motivation and self-regulation in children. And I think also something you said that was quite interesting was like, how do we sort of talk to a child when they achieve something? Do we just give them a pat? Do we just say, oh, well done? Or do we talk to them about the journey that they went through and how that made them feel?
Yeah, so if parents are interested, or if you're just genuinely interested about this, an amazing woman called Carol Dweck, she has an amazing TED talk, all on the growth mindset. What she discovered is that when you praise the outcome versus praising the process, it's a completely different experience for a human being. So if I just said to you, if you worked, you had a result, and I was just like, well done, good job, that's fine, you're going to feel good about achieving something. Whereas if I say to you, you worked so hard, didn't you? You've really tried your best. I love the way in which you thought about this. That then starts a different reflection about what your experiences was, because it's saying working hard, trying your best, motivating yourself, keeping on persevering. It's not attached to an outcome. And that's going to sustain you no matter what experience you have, because every time we're going to experience failure in our life, it's part of the process. And we should, absolutely, it's the process of learning. But when the praise is just focused on the outcome, it's so damaging, because all I feel valued for is achieving. And when I don't achieve, it's then directly related to my self-worth. And I think this is something as parents we have to be so conscious about our language, about how we speak, how we encourage those habits to form in a human being, and how we encourage self-motivation, because you can sustain yourself if you achieve setbacks, and you know that's part of the process. You know, if you have that resilience from a young age to keeping on learning, keeping on trying. And one of the things in our environment that's really special is that all the materials have something called a control of error. So when something's wrong, the child can see clearly that there's something wrong. They don't need external person to say that's not how you do it. They can already see it. And that's a huge part of the process of learning, as well as self-correcting and keeping on going. So I think just the way in which we can praise the process of learning is so powerful for us.
And also, like, you know, when you get 9 out of 10, you then set a benchmark, and it's so difficult, because then all that you're attached to is constantly getting that, and fear of almost not getting it. And actually, you know, the joy of getting to that outcome is the journey. That's 90% of the fulfillment and the happiness. And I actually think, you know, the way that you talked about it is not just for children, but it's in all the relationships you have in life, even when it's with your partner or your best friend, like actually making them feel like you understand their journey and what they went through towards getting towards that outcome can lead to a much more sort of fulfilling and more richer relationship with the people around you. So talking about relationships, what was it like being my sister, putting you on the spot?
I've learned so much, I really feel, because, you know, I'm younger than you. You have been such an influencer in my life, because your journey and your story has been so powerful for me to experience. Those people listening won't know how drastically different our experiences were in education. Maybe you're guessing from what I'm telling is that I had quite a stable, enjoyable experience in my education, but you definitely didn't. And that has been always a huge point of reflection for me as your sister, because I've seen you suffer through it, and I've seen the messages you were given as a young child. And even though I couldn't understand it at the time in its full gravity and extent, it made me, I think, learn compassion, because seeing you so down at times and so like outcasted from an environment, I feel like in my heart I was like, this is just not how it should be, you know. And I felt this like almost anger, like how can they not see you, particularly now as an adult and I've gone through this experience. I'm just thinking, how is that okay? You know, how was that the message you were given as a child? Like, that's just not okay. And then, you know, your experiences with dyspraxia as well, and that not being diagnosed for most of your life, I think that was also a huge point of learning for me, because, you know, when we figured it out, it's like, that made so much sense, and why could nobody see that for you? Like, it's to really come back to understanding that human being and understanding how they learn and how they interact, you know, because it was obviously so hugely influential in your experience of learning. And I think the other part, being your sister, that has been an amazing thing is that, you know, your energy is so exciting and so much fun. And I think, you know, the reason why you have such a big network of friends is because people just gravitate towards you for your energy alone. I've had so much fun being around you, and we've gone into crazy adventures that I definitely wouldn't have had in my life without you. And I think that that's been so powerful for me as a human being, to have somebody in my life who can, you know, really bring out that fun side in me at times.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, especially, you know, when it's not easy running a family business, and you know, we're always surrounded by our family, and you come home to that environment, and so I guess I'm just always like, even despite what I've been through and my experiences and all that stuff, like, I don't know why, like, it's never changed for me, this fun, almost playful side, you know. And talking about family businesses, you know, how do you set the boundaries within working in a family environment? Because it's quite difficult when you know, some of us who do work in that family environment, you know, you don't switch off. You go to work, you come home, and you can still be talking about it at the dinner table.
So yeah, I think if I talk about this more hypothetically, in the sense that, say, for example, I had a child, and in their life, in their mission, they decided to become a part of it. I think the first thing is that the person needs to feel autonomy. They need to have made a conscious choice to be there. Because for me, I was extremely fortunate that, you know, this was never forced upon me. I made a choice, I gave it a little go, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And that love for this work has sustained me through all the challenges that have been there, because it has been like, it's been the biggest challenge in my life without you know, a hesitation. So if I had been forced in that situation, it would not be the same experience for me. If I didn't love this work, I would not be able to sustain myself. I think I'd just be really sad and miserable if I had to go through this.
And resentful.
Yeah, because, you know, this has to be, if you're making that decision, it has to be coming from within you. And then I think, you know, there has to be a strong system in place within an organisation, because I think the systems within an organisation carry it. That, I think, takes off most of the burden when there's strong systems and a strong culture within the organisation of respect, understanding, support, supervision. I think having you know, strong supervision, having a mentor or somebody within that organisation to support that human being who's going through that journey of being in a very different environment, very different setup, clear parameters, and having a very clearly defined role is so important for it to go successfully.
And also just having, you know, obviously when you're family, it's a very informal relationship. So when you go to work, you need to have some professional boundaries, and you need to create almost a space where, you know, every few weeks you're reflecting and you're creating that very intentional professional space, right?
Absolutely, yeah, completely.
Definitely. So what I'd like to ask you next is, talking about legacies and missions, what footprint would you like to be like? Or would you like to leave on Earth? What would you like to be known for?
Well, I think with COVID, this has sort of maybe become even stronger in my mind. Where I'm at right now is that I want every single child who's been in that space to feel that they've been loved, that somebody on this earth cared about them to the nth degree. And if that's all I achieve in my life, I'll be beyond thrilled, because for me, that experience of having children who know how much they're cared for and how much they're loved and how supported they are is so moving at times. When you see how much it changes everything, how that person just opens, gains confidence, self-esteem, motivation, perseverance, concentration through that relationship and through that experience. And if that's the footprint I leave on this earth, in my community, within this space, I'll be extremely thrilled with that. That's definitely enough for me.
And something I would like to ask all my guests as a closing sort of question is, why, and it's a very deep question of course, but in a sort of nutshell, what's your intuition on why you think we are here on Earth?
I really feel it's to make a difference, whether it's a small difference or a large difference. I feel we have to leave this earth better than how we found it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a conscious, collaborative effort to make a difference in our own way, in whichever shape or form we can, to others. Because for me, it's been the most powerful experience of my life, making a difference, not seeing this as a job, but this as my inner mission in life. I feel like we all have our own mission, and we all have something unique that we can give this earth that somebody else perhaps couldn't. And to find what that is and to do it in our own way is, I think, the biggest joy in life.
And do you believe there's something next after this?
I think that, I think there is definitely like a shared consciousness, and I think we sort of go back into that realm at some point after death. But I don't know how it unfolds, but I feel like there's a strong spirit within each one of us. There's something, that conscious element within us. It didn't come from nowhere. That thing that is uniquely ours, and I feel like it definitely lives on after this life.
It's like, as Deepak Chopra said, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're having a spiritual experience as a human being, right? Yeah. So final closing remarks. Is there anything you'd like to ask me?
What was it like being my sister?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful that I have a sister, because I know that a lot of people kind of see our bond and they're very admiring of it, because they definitely see you as my mini ninja, my sidekick, and I'm very aware that not everybody is so lucky to have such a close relationship with their sibling. But it's also a very conscious thing that we've developed. It's not something that was just like that.
It's such an easy question, because I think it comes actually as the best moment in my whole life. And then you know what it is. It's when you did your TEDx talk in Luxembourg. I can't tell you what that experience was like as your sister, and particularly your younger sister. It was the best moment of my life, because it was already a very challenging experience, because you didn't have much time to prepare for it, and you had so much going on at that time. And I arrived the night before, and the transformation from that Friday night to the Saturday, when you did it and you smashed it, I had tears in my eyes when the auditorium were clapping, because I've never felt just more joy in my life to see you just achieve your goals and your dreams, and I can't really describe that feeling. To see you just deliver what's inside of you, and it was a beautiful experience in my life. So
thanks. Well, thanks for being there, because as you said, I didn't have much time. It was about 6 weeks, and I was in 6 countries that week. Sorry, in those 6 weeks, and it's not something a lot of people sort of spend almost a year developing. I had crazy statistics, like people spend 1 hour practicing just 1 minute of speech, because it's just so daunting being up there. And it wasn't really about the brand and what can come after. It was really the point of putting yourself up on stage and being vulnerable and sharing your story, and knowing also that it can get scrutinized by thousands of people. That's I think the hardest part of it. And also another question I'd love to ask you is, when did you feel like our relationship or our sisterhood evolved? Because it's one thing being young, being children, and then being teenagers and being young adults, and I think in our earlier years, we actually didn't have much of a bond. So it's interesting how we've really developed a very close bond since then.
So for me, there's a very clear defining moment in my life when this happened. It's when I really needed somebody in my life and I didn't have anyone. I was 15 and I was in my room and I was crying because some girls weren't being very kind to me, and I didn't know how to cope. And you walk into my room and you see me like really upset, and the way you were with me was something I didn't expect. I thought I didn't know what to expect, and you just came to me and you're like, what's going on? Who's being mean to my sister? That's just not okay. And I told you everything, and you were like, that's just not on. Come, let's go. And I was like, where are we going? It's a school night. You're like, no, I'm going to take you with my friends. You don't need these people. I was like, okay. And so you took me to the Natural History Ice Skating Museum, the ice rink, and you were with your cool friends who were like older than me, and it was a school night, and I just had the most amazing experience, just being completely in a different headspace. It was so quickly. And I just felt so loved really by you and just so supported. And I think that from that moment, our sisterhood was defined. And I actually am grateful that experience happened in my life, because it led to our friendship just evolving so much faster and deeper. And since then, like, we've just sort of been a bit inseparable and always there for each other, which I'm so grateful for.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, like, you know, people see us and they think we're twins, but you know, you are my younger sister, and I think that, you know, particularly at that age, I must have been what, like 18, around that age or something. And I think I'd just been diagnosed a few years prior to that with dyspraxia, and I was very introverted. I certainly did not know how to communicate. I found it really tough to communicate. So you probably didn't know just how much I valued and treasured you, and just how overprotective I was of you, because I wasn't really communicating that at all. But the second that, you know, a threat came in that environment, it was like, no, there's no way anyone's, you know, hurting my little sister. And I think, like, even our friends who know us today will probably laugh, because they do know how overprotective I am over you. Even to the point where, you know, boys are scared to come near you, because, like, there's a bouncer, aka ninja, to go through before they can get to you. And you know, so that's definitely interesting how negative experience can actually transform into such a positive, longer lasting experience. It's been really lucky to have you as a sister. So thank you so much, Sabeen, for coming on the show and for doing Mission Makers and for being our season finale.
I've loved being here, and I can't wait for your next season.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be an interesting one.
I had goosebumps all the way through filming this episode. One of the first things that my sister said in this episode was that unlocking our childhood is such a deep and personal uncovering that we really have to be ready to go into authentically. And it's so true, because it's not an easy thing to go through, because we really have to evaluate whether the messages that we were given early on were the right ones. And it's so interesting, because both me and my sister were raised in the same household, and whilst we had the right messages coming to us from our families, the external environments of our schools were completely juxtaposed in the messages that we were given. And as a result, you know, one of us has gone through a hell of a lot more trauma than the other. And so it's absolutely critical to kind of go into that journey in order to be able to put together those pieces of our life's puzzle and think then, how do we want to nurture and grow an incredible new life force? And it's funny, because as the years have gone, you could probably tell that the relationship between me and my sister have kind of done a role reversal over time, where it actually feels like she's my older sister, because she's so profound in her understanding and guidance of human beings and of our family as well. And there were so many things she said in this episode that I do hope resonated with you guys. Some of the things that really stood out to me is how she says that the feeling that you get when you enter a space tells you everything. And I think that's so true, not only when, you know, making the life-changing decision of where to send our children to school, but for everyone when they enter a space, to really feel with all of their senses if that energy is positive and if we really want to be there. And I also thought it was so true about what she says about praising the process and not the outcome. Too often in life, we are measured completely by our outcomes, and that has a huge effect in how we view ourselves. If the process of learning is encouraged more from a young age, we learn to love that journey more and become more resilient and fulfilled as a result of our efforts. And the power of just one person loving and believing in us can be all it takes, and can be so profound in grounding us towards true happiness. Finally, I've also learned a lot from my sister about setting myself up into the right headspace before starting my day. As Sabeen says, she's going into a highly stressful environment where just one comment can shatter a child's self-esteem, or 1 second of not noticing if a child is doing something dangerous could be fatal, and that requires a huge amount of internal energy, not only from herself, but from the team as well. And that's something that's really stuck by me in all of these years, and I find that when me and my teams, we're so much more equipped when we take the time to meditate and look after our minds and bodies before starting our days and after ending our days, in order to be our best selves for those around us. So I really hope you guys take that away, and I hope that you guys have really enjoyed season 1. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much to all of our guests who came onto the show and shared their amazing stories and insights. I really hope it's left you with some really, really incredible inspiration to put this year into perspective and to start 2021 with a renewed energy to get through this crazy pandemic. Season 2 will be back in March, but we will be sharing a few bonus episodes in January, so do be sure to tune into that. And from all of us here at Mission Makers, wishing you and your families happy holidays and a happy new year. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. I hope you're leaving with some great inspiration that can help you with whatever you want to achieve in your life. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe via your favourite podcast platform so you can be notified when a new episode is posted. It would also mean the world to us if you could rate and review the show and share it with your friends so we can reach as many people as possible. If you want to reach out to me as well, you can get in touch directly at dj.n1nja on Instagram and Twitter. That's dj.n1nja, and also at Mission Makers on social media. Thanks so much again for listening. Until next time, Mission Makers, stay safe and have an amazing week.